Hi everyone, welcome to another Reasons and Resources episode. In this episode we're going through Ruby, and I'll do the usual thing of going through reasons why you might want to learn Ruby, along with my own, Ruby reasons story as to why I've taken a look at Ruby, want to learn some more, and then we'll get on to some resources. It's going to be fairly easy here actually, because the Ruby resources through the main Ruby set website are excellent. So we'll talk a little bit about those in the discussion. But I'm going to tick the usual boxes of going through, looking at how Ruby's viewed on Stack Overflow, the Stack Overflow survey, look at the website resources, the main one, talk a little bit about where you can run Ruby if you want to run it online or do some work through some graded exercises that sort of test your programming, those sort of things. We'll have some old friends coming back, and we'll have some new stuff to see. On a bigger scale, if you've not seen my previous videos, this is really part of a learning process I'm doing in working through a book called Programming Language Explorations, which I've mentioned in previous episodes. And there's a chapter dedicated to Ruby in there. So that's sort of one of the reasons why I'm, learning or revisiting Ruby again. So yeah, part of all of that is going to be mixed in, and I'm working towards some sort of learning resource for multiple languages. I'm still unsure about what form that's going to take, whether it's going to be something through GitHub or a website or videos or a combination thereof. But no doubt over the end of the year, particularly 2025, hopefully you'll see content emerge that I'll point you towards, which is my own sort of wrestling with comparing and contrasting programming languages. So that's where I'm going with this. So other reason, like why Ruby? Well, for me, what's interesting and something else that I tend to do is, when I first came to Nova Scotia at the end of 2009, beginning of 2010, there was a family member over here who was working in development and was working actually with Ruby on Rails. So I got interested, and as I tend to do, when I get interested in something, I buy a book. So I bought a Ruby on Rails book. But then what happened was I went, because at that point I was entertaining being self-employed again, doing IT support, but ultimately I went back to work for a firm. So I pushed a lot of that to the side, didn't really look back into Ruby until I picked up the 7 Languages in 7 Weeks book in the last year or so, after again putting that to one side for numerous years. And as a consequence, I got interested in learning Ruby off Rails. So I spent like a month kicking the tires of Ruby, and there is a video out about, as part of the Learn to Code, Code to Learn series, where I sort of talk about that and explain some of the things I learned. So that was my introduction to Ruby and reasons for learning it. One thing I've noticed that sort of helps, if you're looking for your own reasons to learn Ruby, is the syntax I've found is very simple and readable. I'll include links to all of these resources so you can read a little bit more about the background behind Ruby itself, who created it, some of the facts and features if you like, but that's not going to be really the core of this video. It's more just sort of encouraging you to check out the language. So I'll include a link to that. The other thing that always makes me curious is, I think I've mentioned these influence lists, and when I look through this, I noticed that Perl's on there, Smalltalk, Basic Java, which are 4 languages I have dabbled with, but also I4, Ada and Lisp, which were also on a list I put together many years ago when I first got interested in comparable programming languages, of the sort of languages I wanted to take a look at. So they're also on my list, and I'll be interested in going through the Programming Language Explorations book, which is, only just come out recently. Which ones are covered? Because I'm sort of working through the book in order, and I'm not really sort of skipping ahead. So there's no spoilers for the languages, apart from what I've sort of seen in the contents, the table of contents. So if you want to read about that. Now, in terms of quickly looking at the syntax, one way is to quickly look there's actually an article on Ruby syntax in Wikipedia. It's got its own dedicated article there. So you can sort of get a feel. If you're used to looking at other forms of code, you might be able to work out, what's going on here. So you can see we're printing something out. There's a print out to the screen. We're grabbing something. We're grabbing some entry. Chomp here takes off, I think, isn't it? It basically removes certain aspects, so when you reprint it, you don't get any weird side effects, from sort of inputting it. And then it puts it out to the screen in this format. Then you can see the variable name goes in there, slots in there. So, and it also has this interactive Ruby shell as well. So, you can run stuff in there, save it to a file, run it from the command line, those sort of things. I'll check back. I'll see if I think at some point I probably did do a video about setting up Ruby, but if I didn't, I'll do one in the future. But I found it very easy, just basically installed Ruby. I had Visual Studio Code already installed, made sure Ruby worked fine on the command line, and then installed the Ruby plugins in Visual Studio Code, make sure it worked in the command line in Visual Studio Code, and away I went. And you can see it's got things like conversions in it, handle strings, those sort of things. So yeah. And you can see here, very obvious things going on here. Reversing, flatten. We've got control structures in the language. So yeah, simple and readable, just how I like it. Also found the way it handles files to be very interesting as well. Now the other thing you can explore, but I won't really touch on it, is Ruby on Rails. So there's this Rails framework, which is widely used for web development. Like I said, although I have a book on Ruby on Rails, ultimately when I came to properly learn it off the back of the 7 languages in 7 weeks, that's a Ruby off Rails version. So I'm dabbling sort of off Rails at the moment, and will be for the foreseeable future, I'm assuming. But if you want to get into Ruby on Rails, you can go through the various links to discover more. The other thing you'll notice with this is that there's a real sort of strong community. There's loads of resources, libraries, frameworks out there, so you're not short for resources. Very versatile language, use it for web development, data processing, automation, and of course all of the frameworks, libraries available increase that versatility. There's a whole load of features that people might find interesting. I know when I'm working in new languages, I'm always curious as to what features the language gives me that maybe I'm not used to having, or maybe I have to work for in other languages. So that's always a cool thing to check out if you're looking sort of for reasons for learning a certain language. Is, what are the features in there? So popularity or the demand. So we'll do the usual thing and look at the stats on the most recent Stack Overflow survey. So programming, scripting and markup languages in terms of most popular. You can see, as I pointed out before, we've got the usual suspects up here. Now Ruby's somewhere down here on this particular list. If we turn our attention to the admired and desired, this lovely graph, which I think is really cool, and as long as you read it around the right way, as I've had trouble with. So interestingly enough, desired is 4.7, but it is admired is right up here at 76.8. And yeah, just, I don't know if I pointed out, here it does say straight away that Rust is the most the most admired. Most admired. Yeah, so here, question: which programming, scripting, and markup languages have you done extensive development work over the past year? Which do you want to work in over the next year? And which do you want to work in over the next year? If you both worked with the language you want to continue to do so, please check both boxes in that row. So this was the question that they asked to get these results. Then we've got top paying technologies. Yeah, it's quite high up there. Erlang, Alexia, Clojure, Nim are above it. So if, top paying jobs is your motivation, then yeah, you got it. And you can see the questions there that they asked for that. This is really useful, so you can see exactly the question in the survey that was asked alongside the data that they collected. So let's move on to the main Ruby website. So this is the main page. So you can see straight away it's got links to download. You can also try Ruby in your browser, which we'll look at in a moment. Lots of documentation. We've got manuals, programming Ruby, the Ruby programming wikibook as well. So yeah, I would definitely suggest here of starting from here and like drilling down. Here's the try Ruby part where you can experiment. I have mentioned exorcism before, and I normally try and avoid mentioning the same resources over and over again, but I was curious as to what concepts you can work through for Ruby, and there's quite a number here. So you can go through 20 key concepts, starting off with the basics. And the reason why I bring this up is they have like a nice interactive and test section, so you can actually go on to a learning exercise in here, and once you log in, you can sign up for free. You can start to actually put in some code based on a challenge and get the system to evaluate your code. So yeah, very useful resource if you're not aware of it. Here's the community page for Ruby Lang. So lots of useful links here. There's the Programming Ruby online book that was sort of linked to, or had a link for earlier. Yeah, so again, be careful with, one thing I will say, be careful with online resources in terms of, books. The books themselves could be, quite out of date. Sometimes that's why they're free. But, you can always go back to the documentation. Once you get a grasp of the language, then I find the reference documentation gets easier to read. And at some point you really need to visit the reference documentation, I think. And this is the first edition of the seminal work, but as I said, it's slightly out of date. There is a aforementioned Ruby programming wikibook as well, but you can easily get to there, so I haven't included it as a deep link. YouTube resources, interview or keynote speech by the creator of the language from RubyConf 2023. We've got Ruby Central YouTube channel. You can see various conferences, the Rails Conf that people might find useful. And then the Ruby on Rails documentary. Honeypot have a number of interesting documentaries, as you can see. We've got Elixir, Node.js, worth checking out. So I include links to that. And then finally, podcasts. Well, I think probably best to go from the actual Ruby Lang website from there and explore various podcasts. So we've got Ruby Rogues podcast, the Ruby on Rails podcast, Remote Ruby, and then Rooftop Ruby. But again, you can go on to your favourite podcatcher, streaming software, and find a lot of other stuff. So hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully you'll enjoy, if you decide to go down the Ruby rabbit hole, you'll enjoy wrestling with the language in a good way, as much as I did. Thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in a future episode.